I'm going to record this class, and I think just moving forward, I'm just going to record all the classes. I was notified by one person they have to leave early. There's kind of no downside to recording the class. You can always access it when you're answering the questions. If you want a refresher on how we discuss them, and what the general consensus was on what the data and evidence shows in terms of what are the correct answers. And again, feel free to disagree with what I think are valid and distinct, and not distinct, but valid answers. If you can just send me a reference. I mean, if you say, other people think why, then that's great. I mean, again, it just expands our ability to analyze issues. Anyway, we've got 11 out of 13 people on the call, so that's great. Why don't we just get started? I'm going to change it up a little bit and tell you what I thought was one of the more interesting stories on Kaiser Health News and get your input on it. So one of I think it was from today actually, was that Massachusetts is trying to pass a statute that prisoners should be allowed to donate organs and bone marrow for reduced prison sentences. So everybody and anybody, thoughts, ideas, makes sense, doesn't. So there's federal law that you are not allowed to sell your organs. It's just considered unethical. And we can discuss why that is. And the international sale of organs is generally frowned upon and thought to be, not proper. So tell me what your visceral thoughts on it. If you saw the article, great. If you didn't, it doesn't make any difference. I just want your input, please.
I didn't see the article, but it kind of sounds like a way to take advantage of vulnerable populations. I mean, yes, they're in prison, but in that state, they are in the control of somebody else.
So I'm going to challenge you. I'm not going to tell you whether I agree or disagree, but I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to say, well, don't they have a right as adults, autonomous individuals, to decide what they do with their bodies?
Yes. And I think that were they not in a situation where it was like almost a quid pro quo, that it would be perfectly fine. But it does seem a little bit shady to offer them reduced sentences for donation. So
that's a very interesting perspective. And so I'm going to change the scenario and ask Keisha to not respond, but anybody else to respond. So there's a special circumstance with prisoners. I don't think anybody, on this Zoom would disagree. There is a unique circumstance in terms of the position of prisoners and trying to reduce their. Well, what if you're poverty stricken? What if you're unemployed? What if you're homeless? What if you have a job that doesn't allow you to feed your family? Is that more or less coercive or different than being in prison? In other words, yeah, I'm sorry. Yep.
It's the same. Like, vulnerable populations or anybody who are vulnerable to deception or vulnerable to coercion. Therefore, like, I feel like it's the same. Like, it doesn't really matter what population that you're talking about. If somebody is in the predicament to be vulnerable to coercion, then they're most likely going to do whatever it is to like keep their family afloat or reduce their prison sentence, whatever it is.
I can't thank you enough for sharing your sentiments. Is poverty coercive? Like anybody who hasn't spoken, because Misa and Keisha are phenomenal. They're always adding in, and I love it. And thank you both. But I just try to get everybody in this since it's 15% of your grade, please. So the question was, and thank you, Olivia, I'll just repeat the question so everybody can hear it. Is poverty coercive?
What do you mean by coercive?
What do you think coercive means?
Like forced?
Exactly. I'm holding a gun to your loved one's head and say, do this. Is that something that you're voluntarily doing?
I'm sorry, Liv, you can go. I just wanted to clarify.
Oh,
no, I want you to think about what's coercive, because I don't, again, I don't have the answers. I have a lot of questions and I'd love your input, and I'd like you to just think about these issues.
Well, I was just going to say something a little bit different. I mean, I don't think poverty is like coercive. Like nobody wants to be in poverty, just like nobody like wants to be in jail.
No. I'm not asking, and I think I'll just clarify. So it's not that you want to be poor. Is being in the position of being poor and homeless and not having resources an inherently coercive position? That's what I'm saying. It's not that they're volunteering to be impoverished or homeless or in need or resource poor. Is it inherently, and inherently just means in and of itself, the very nature of the thing. That's what inherently means. If for those of you who don't, I love the word, so I use it all the time, but it's not frequently used, or maybe it is, but I like to flatter myself. So
I mean, I would say that like not quite all of it is necessarily in their control,
yeah,
but
no, none of it's, frankly, none of it. If you're born into poverty, none of it's in your control. I mean, the question I'm trying to get you guys to think about is that inherently a profoundly disadvantaged position that would have you make decisions that you otherwise wouldn't make?
I'd say yes.
Cool.
But also going back to like the prisoner thing, I did a research project in high school about organ donation and like the need for organs basically. And I think like it's definitely like a huge thing, but it's like there's so many ethical considerations behind it. But I mean, I've also seen a lot about like prisoners like going through their treatment and their therapy and everything and wanting to do good and wanting to give back and everything, but a lot of it like again isn't really in their control. They can only do so much from inside prison. So this could be a way for them to like feel like they're doing some good.
Olivia, excellent point. I'm glad you brought it up. Let's have somebody else speak. And here's the question I'm going to ask the next person who's going to speak. Is there a difference between altruistic organ donation and bone marrow donation versus a quid pro quo? Quid pro quo meaning you get something for your organ donation. So if it's altruistic, you're just doing it because you want to do good, which is what Olivia mentioned. And that's a wonderful and amazing thing. But if you're doing it, is there a difference when you're doing it for purely altruistic reasons and there's no quid pro quo? Or is there a difference when you're doing it for a reduced prison term? Anybody who hasn't spoken, please.
I feel like there's like a gray area in that too. Like definitely some people are doing it because they want to, like with their family and stuff. But like with prisoners doing it, they're trying to get out on good behavior. They're trying to get a reduced sentence. So like doing those things are trying to help them while they're helping someone else. So it's like they're kind of doing like a 1-for-1 sort of thing. Like there's not really a straight answer. Like granted that like a lot of them are doing it just for themselves and like being like, oh, well, I'll get to be in the med or their like medical room for this amount of time for my recovery. I don't have to be in general population or solitary, so I get out of that situation.
So you said it's a gray zone. I don't disagree. So what would be the factors that would sway you one way or the other in the gray zone? And either you can answer, Kelsey, or anybody who hasn't. What would be the factors in the assessment of whether something's an altruistic act versus an act that's performed for quid pro quo, especially for the disadvantaged communities?
Altruistic is going to be like, it doesn't give a benefit to you at all. Like you don't expect anything from it. You don't want anything from it. You're doing it purely to help someone else.
Should that be allowed, or is that equally as reprehensible as for because they're prisoners for a reduction in their sentence?
I mean, it depends on really what their motive is for it, but there's also no way to prove what their motive is unless
no, it's easy to prove what their motive is. If you say every prisoner is free to donate their marrow or their organs, it's just it's not going to go into your parole hearing. It's not going to go into your your early release record, and we're not going to reduce your sentence. Then it's completely controlled. If you actually volunteer, I mean, right? I'm not sure about this, but I wonder if prisoners can just send in buccal swabs, swab your oral cavity so that people can do, genomic testing and figure out if you're a match for somebody, for like a bone marrow transplant. I'm sure, at your parole hearing or early release hearing, you can say, hey, he's been a pastor, he's gotten or she's gotten a advanced degree, they volunteer, they do counseling, they do this, they do that, all of which are showing good behavior. Ooh, handsome cat, Keisha. Sorry, I had to interrupt. Ooh, such a pretty thing. Anyway, you can make it very clear that it's for altruistic reasons because there's no benefit to the individual with regard to. So I'm going to ask another question, and to anybody who hasn't spoken already, is it coercive that people put their lives at risk and take a job as a coal miner, knowing the risk to their lungs and knowing the risk of mine collapses and death, and any highly dangerous job, whether it be fishing on the Bering Sea, which we see reality shows about, or coal mining, or working with hazardous substances? Do you think, for instance, it's coercive that people who don't have the means are spraying pesticides and chemicals on lawns all day long to make a living?
Well, I mean, there's a need for people to do that job. And if you're willing to take that risk, then like, of course, but all at the same time, like my dad works in boilers all day. So
A little asbestos there, huh?
yeah, he is actually now like being tested to see if he has like acute liver disease because of him being exposed to all that stuff. He's been doing this job since he graduated from high school.
Yeah,
So
did he choose to do that job, or was that the highest paying job that he could support you and your family? And he just took the risk because that was after his education. He said, this is a great opportunity for me to make a decent living and provide for my family. Is that choice, or is that what I would describe as the exigency?
in that, I would believe like if that's something like you're passionate of doing, then like that's your choice. I feel like being like, I guess we'll put it like the breadwinner of the family shouldn't have to make an impact because I mean, not only just him is working, like my mom owns her own business. So like it's also that job runs, I guess we'll put like run in the family because my grandfather also did it for a long time as well. But it shouldn't like, I guess to me, it doesn't really personally matter if you're choosing a job because it brings good money, or it should be you're doing this job because you're passionate about it and you look forward to go to work every day.
So
Like everyone should be able to look forward to go to their job every day.
yeah, you bring up just a phenomenal point, and it goes to the whole issue of autonomy. And if it's something you're passionate about, and let's just say you're a passionate fisherman and you want to be on the Bering Sea, even though the mortality from that job is much higher than many other jobs, that's an autonomy issue. If you ask the people who are taking that job, well, I do it because it pays well and it's the only way I can pay my mortgage or feed my kids, that's a very different fact pattern and fact scenario. So I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm glad you brought up that point. As the big distinction between someone who's doing it because they love it and they're willing to endure the risk versus people who are doing it out of exigency, which is just fancy term for necessity. I'll give you another example, and again, anybody who hasn't spoken, in India people are dying. And no pun intended, sorry about that. It's a poor use of words. People are more than willing to donate organs to make money. Should that be allowed? Is that permissible? Is that exigency? Is that coercion? Or is that people exercising their autonomy? Yeah, Monica, please.
That's I think definitely coercion, because people in India who are forced to donate money, they get paid very less amount of what they actually should. I mean, they get paid for it, but it's very, very less. And they are usually doing it to support their family and feed themselves and their family too. So I think that's definitely coercion. And I don't think that's right, because at that point, it brings this immoral, like you are donating your organ to make money. I think that's not a moral choice.
Yeah. So many people agree with you, Monica, and thanks for bringing up the point. So I think I would say you firmly sit in the camp of economic coercion. I think you firmly sit in the camp of, you know, doing this to feed your family is immoral and wrong. Doing this if you love it and you want to be altruistic is a different situation. But again, we have entire populations internationally. So does anybody who, and this is open to everybody, including people who've spoken before, think that my questions and presentation of this has been jaded and biased, and they'd like to speak up and say, you phrased it, and the questions have been put to us in a way that's unfair or unreasonable. And present your position as to how you think it should be dealt with. Because number one, it's absolutely clear we are in desperate need of organs. People are dying every day because we don't have enough organs to replace, and that's why we have people trying to find pig hearts and baboon hearts and using stem cells to grow organs, or altering organs from other animals to get them. I guess the question is, does the ends justify the means, and how do we make reasonable rules about it? So, you know, anybody who has any thoughts or ideas about it, I'm all ears.
Well, I think like certain like hospitals already do this, but if you're like so passionate about doing organ donation or blood donation or even bone marrow, that if you believe you're at a job that's at risk of taking in certain like bacteria and like other like chemical stuff into your body, should be tested to see if they have that. And then if they come back clear, then they should have the right to be able to donate. But I also like don't really necessarily agree with you getting money for doing a donation, because it is your choice, it's your right. If you're so passionate about helping someone's life, then you should be able to do that. And you should just be able to like remember, like, I did this thing to help someone else and I feel good about myself doing it. No one should have to pay you for doing that.
And thanks for the comments. I think they're spot on. Can I suggest that there might be a reasonable consensus that altruistic donation is a wonderful and beautiful thing, but donation associated with those who are economically or otherwise insecure and with the potential for abuse may be not the best way to look at this. So and that's where I come out. It's all fact specific. I mean, you have to look at the individual facts of the person, their situation, you know, what's the quid pro quo, if any quid pro quo, meaning the tit for tat, what you get for donating. But I was like beyond shocked, and I think you guys already know my bias on this issue, that Massachusetts would entertain it. I mean, are there circumstances that are inherently biased that we should completely undermine people's autonomy to make a decision because the situation is so inherently biased? And I'll just give you one example to just make it easy. The right to try experimental treatments for those who are terminally ill. There was a big push probably within the past 5 years. I think it was 3 to 5 years ago. Every time I say it, it's 8 to 10 years ago, but whatever, to allow people to try experimental treatments who had a terminal illness. Is that, and this is really a controversial issue, so I again love to hear your input on this. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? Should people who are terminally ill or in desperate situations be allowed to try experimental treatments, meaning non-FDA approved, in the pipeline for whether this works or not? Make it easy again. Anybody who hasn't spoken, you have a terminal illness, it's rare, There's no known treatment. There are 3 companies doing, phase 1 trials on animals for a treatment. And you say, I want to enter myself as a human being into these animal trials because there's no treatment for what the condition I have. And this happens all the time. I don't want you to think, oh, I'm making this up out of clear air. This happens all the time.
Are we talking like about those cancer trials or those further in the trial than animal treatments? I don't know.
No. So everything starts with a hypothesis, and then you start at animal safety and efficacy. Then you move to limited, human trials, and then you move to larger trials, typically in the FDA sequence.
So when are these people like starting them? Are we trying to like, I don't know. I'm trying to think about how you're asking the question.
So I'm asking the question where the FDA has not approved this as safe and effective at all. Okay, they're saying this is completely experimental. You might be in animal trials or early trials, but it's never been approved. So we have no idea whether this drug works. We don't know the side effects. Oh, somebody just joined class. Hang on, I just want to share with you. That's Clay. He's 13 months old. Anyway, so it's not been approved by the FDA or Europe or anything, but people are like, I'm between a rock and a hard place. I just enroll me. I don't care.
Well, I think if you're willing to take the risk, then like, of course, but this is like a very like, I don't want to say like sensitive subject, but
oh
like,
no, it's a crazy sensitive subject, and there's people as
like,
passionately on one side as the other.
I have someone in my family who's currently enrolled in a breast cancer trial to see if she can go back into remission again. Like she's stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. So, and like, if you were to meet the woman today, you would never know that she like has this like disease. And this is her 3rd trial that she's been on to see if it works. So someone like her in that situation, like she's willing to take that risk. She's willing to go to the hospital like once or twice a week to like get all the blood work done, get her scans done, like try different doses of her meds. Like I've been sat on phone calls with her research doctors, like about her trial. And it's so like, of course it's going to be like a fluctuation thing. But if you put your mind and your heart, that's like, if I don't take this chance, like, what if like I die from this terminal disease? Like, it's more if your mind and your heart is like really willing to take that sacrifice, if this miracle drug could work.
So sorry for whoever's enduring that, because it's a beyond painful experience, but it's such a phenomenal anecdote because it really shrinks down the decision making in that situation. So is being terminally ill an inherently coercive condition?
I mean, nobody like it's usually from some like a disease or an illness, whether it's genetic or not, but it's so out of your control, like to be like terminally ill. And somebody like, I don't know, I feel like if I were ever in that situation, I would probably try and do like whatever I could to get better, and if not for me, for like the sake of science, to help others with the same condition so it can be prevented later in the future.
So, and that's truly an altruistic, and that's the hugest argument for allowing this, that even if this turns out to be not safe or effective, that you're advancing science and it's truly an altruistic reason. Do you think people who just want to live, that's an altruistic reason for entering into these trials of completely unproven drugs? Might be both, might be altruistic and it might be selfish. Monica? I only asked you to speak because you kind of smiled, thinking it obviously triggered some thoughts in you.
Sorry, what was the question again?
Don't worry. You may have smiled because you're like shopping for something and found a deal. So yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call on you because I just saw you smile. So I thought you might be like entertained by what I queried as as a possibility. So, you know, it might be altruistic, it might be selfish, it might be both. So where do people fall in this? Especially anybody who hasn't spoken, and you know who you are. So please, if you've spoken, don't answer this question. Please, if you haven't spoken, answer this question. There's no right or wrong answer here. The beauty of this is when you speak, all it does is enhance your class participation because there's no wrong answer here. Who hasn't spoken? Raise your hand if you haven't spoken. So either what, Sydney, Megan, Jack, go for it. So when you're in you have a terminal illness, and there's a drug out there that is completely unproven. If there's a clinical trial, at least the clinical trial has been approved as ethical. But is that an altruistic act? Is that a selfish act, or could it possibly be both? How do we draw the lines? And, you know, sort of what is the fact scenario that you would sort of look at to figure out if this is the right thing to do?
I feel like it's a little bit of both. Like, it's definitely, they're probably doing it out of self-preservation, just because they've run out of options. But I also feel like they're doing it to also see if it works for other cancer patients, if it's for cancer. But I also feel like if they're terminally ill and they're out of the point where they're running out of options, like, what is the harm of doing it if they're already terminally ill?
Megan, thanks for speaking up, and thanks for asking that incredibly cogent question of what is the harm, because that's brought up all the time. What's completely spurious, false about the concept of what's the harm, you're going to die anyway? Sydney or Jack, what is the completely fake and deceptive aspect of the concept of the premise? What's the harm, you're going to die anyway?
Well, there's two different things. There's also sometimes when people are terminally ill, they know they only have a certain amount of time left, so they want to spend that time doing the things that they love, or spending time with the people that they love, not experimenting to help save other people's lives in the future that they don't even know.
Thank you, Sydney.
And then there's also the part where if it's experimental and they don't know if it's safe, they could actually be making it worse for themselves.
100%. Thank you. People who say that was spot on, you rock. You should be smiling now. Good, you're smiling. That's exactly the point. What if it killed you 3, 6 months, a year, 2 years earlier than you otherwise would have been? That's tragic. You just subjected yourself to a horrible experiment. You may suffer, you may have pain, you may have nausea, vomiting, misery. If you had done nothing, and you would have lived another 2 years. And people just forget that. They're like, well, the worst that can happen is you're going to die, and you're going to die anyway. No, the worst you could happen is you'll die earlier, and you'll suffer incredibly during the process of, quote unquote, trying this experimental drug. How many people who are terminally ill think about that? Monica, I'll come to you next. I just want Jack to speak up at some point.
I think everybody who's terminally ill, it crosses their mind what their priorities are, whether it's helping other people or spending the time they want by themselves.
Yeah, so that's an interesting premise. Do you think people who are terminally ill, I don't have the answer to this, so I'd be curious what your opinion is. Do you think people who are terminally ill are thinking about the fact they might die a little earlier, that they're going to do anything they can and everything they can to delay that inevitable state of affairs?
I think most people would turn to doing anything they can.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you completely. So doesn't that undermine the argument that they're grasping at straws? There might be a 1 in a million chance that it's going to protract their life, or let's just even say a 10% chance or 5% chance that it's going to lengthen their life. What if I told you that the vast majority of these studies fail, which they do, and it may significantly detract and shorten their lives? I'm just trying to get your thoughts on the inherent vulnerability and coercive nature of terminal disease.
I think
Yeah, Monica, I wanted to hear your thought. I know you raised your hand.
So it was like related to this question. So I think if someone is choosing to go through the treatment, even when they know that it's not approved, they have considered the risk of maybe I will die early with it. I think at that point it comes to, if they're already terminally ill, it comes down to reducing or eliminating their suffering that they're going through, whether it be they're going to die early or whether it be maybe it's going to work. So I think people who make a choice of, I want to try this treatment, have considered that I might die early.
So that's an interesting, and I think it's a very important point, and it's an argument that's made all the time. I think I'm taking up too much of the time for you guys to tell me your interesting topics, but this one was one that I thought was interesting. So you're gonna have to suffer what I thought was interesting. So the problem is, you're gonna say, and I agree with you, Monica, that the answer is we get good informed consent about the trial. And this is assuming there's a trial. And a trial means it's already been approved by an IRB, Institution Review Board. So I guess the question is, are patients really aware when they're getting informed consent from the trial sponsors? What's the likelihood that is that a true informed consent? Are trial sponsors, when they get informed consent, what's their inherent bias? Again, the use of the word inherent, sorry.
They want to get participants. Maybe it's not like truly consent.
Yeah, it's not informed consent at all. Everybody who's giving you this informed consent wants you to say yes. It's just a complete joke. I mean, we really have a profound problem with research studies that are just biased to get people to agree to them. And so they're going to present whatever evidence they think that will convince you. And two, when they present their results, do they present their results in a balanced light, a negative light, or a positive light? This is all research, so this is a topic that's important. It has nothing to do with any of the topics we're going on. Every bit of research that's out there, are they likely to get published if they have positive results, negative results? When they're interpreting their data, do they spin it in a neutral way, in a negative way, or a positive way?
Well, in research, like, of course, like, you want to show the positive results, but you need to, like, be able to show, like, all of your results. Like, if someone's died from the trial, or someone's, like, totally, in this case, well, if we're talking about cancer, totally cancer-free. Like, it's really depending on how, like, each person in the study's body, like, embrace the medication, I guess I'll put it in that way. But of course, any research doctor is going to want to show the positives of their trial. But I believe you should show all of the work that you've gone through, the good, bad, and the ugly, with, like, the whole process, because that's how research studies, especially with medical trials, I believe that's, like, how they work.
Yeah, it's not how they work. So the reality is that they try to spin things in a positive light. They try to get their results published. The way you get them published is to show a benefit. So I've been watching this for about 15 years, about a bunch of biologics and chemotherapeutic agents that are used. We're going to end the conversation, and we're going to go to what you found interesting on Kaiser Health News this week, or I should say in the past 3 days or 2 days. That there's a p greater than 0.05, meaning statistically significant, and you can define whatever your p point is, but that they gave this people with metastatic melanoma, which I think, if you don't know, I'll tell you, is uniformly lethal. They basically say this drug or this biologic agent increased the lifespan of these patients with metastatic melanoma 6 weeks. So should that drug be approved? It increased their lifespan 6 weeks. Anybody?
Like, how do you know how long they were going to live?
Oh, no, it's a completely legitimate study. It's randomized, it's double blind, and it's controlled. So half the people get the drug, half the people don't. So and let's just say it's a large enough sample. So let's just say it's 3,000 people. So 1,500 people got the biologic, 1,500 people didn't. Of the 1,500 people, they measured it, they lived 6 weeks longer. Does anything not ring true
I
with
mean,
that assessment? Sure, Kelsey, please.
so approving a drug that's going to give you 6 weeks extra time, that's great and all. But how many times do doctors tell patients, oh, you have 2 years to live, and it's an estimate, and they could pass away within 2 months from then? It depends on how rapidly the disease is, what stage you're at. It's not a guarantee that you're going to live that 6 weeks. Every person's different. So while it worked for those people in the trial and for whatever condition they had, it doesn't mean it's going to work for every patient everywhere. So it shouldn't be just an approved drug because it worked in this trial and showed this.
Yeah, so I agree with you completely. Everything's individual, and all our science is not on individuals, or science is on populations of people. So what I'm going to suggest to you is, you know what? 2 or 3 people may die of the drug instantly. They may have an allergic reaction and they'll die instantly, but another 80% lived 3 months. So it didn't make, so it actually, the average was that there was a 6-week increase in longevity. What's not measured in when you're just making an assessment based on longevity?
The
Anybody?
quality of life.
Yeah, quality of life. What if you did a survey, and for the time that they were on this experimental drug, they were queasy, nauseous, in bed, and unable to engage in routine activities of life, which the people who were not on the drug were able to do? Would that sway your opinion on whether this drug should be approved? So I get a strong sense that people are nodding yes. So just as I think I said at the last class, think about everything within the context of question everything you read. That's my goal. My goal is when you read research and when you read studies, question everything. Really dive deep into it. Really make sure that you understand, what the variables are, what other parameters are important. There's a lot of surrogate endpoints that are BS, and if you're interested in what surrogate endpoints are, I'll give you a perfect example. When people were saying we should use beta blockers, which is propranolol, drugs that slow your heart rate for hypertension, they said, beta blockers are great for decreasing your blood pressure. And then somebody finally did a study because they said, it's great to decrease your blood pressure, but what's more important as an endpoint when you're treating hypertension than just decreasing your blood pressure? Because there's this intuitive thought that if your blood pressure goes down, that's great, the drug works. Is there something more important than decreasing your blood pressure? What are we all trying to do with all this hypertension treatment? Is it to decrease our blood pressure or something bigger?
Well, high blood pressure can lead to many other illnesses. So if you have a lower blood pressure, you're going to have a better quality of life because you're in healthier condition.
Great, Olivia. So Olivia brings up the perfect answer. It's not about having a lower blood pressure. It's about having lower mortality, having fewer strokes, living longer. And when they did the studies, which for years, and when I was trained, beta blockers were considered the way to go. They aren't anymore. Beta blockers lower your blood pressure, but don't decrease your mortality or decrease your incidence of stroke. Does anybody want a beta blocker to treat their blood pressure? Or do they want something that'll decrease their chance of death and stroke? So anyway, that's the whole point of surrogate endpoints. There's a lot of diabetic drugs, and they talk about H1AC, which is the hemoglobin measure of whether your blood pressures, your sugars are controlled and what your average blood sugars are. But if your average blood sugars are really low, but you're dying or having strokes and heart attacks at a higher rate, then who cares what the drug does? So that's the whole concept of surrogate endpoints. So just keep those kinds of issues in mind when you're looking at research, which you're going to do for the rest of your lifetimes. You're going to see studies, you're going to hear news reports, and the news reports so frequently get the information wrong. Okay, I've talked for way too long. It's 12:40. we can just go through the whole crowd for a top, things that you found of interest on Kaiser Health News. I'm just going to go at the top of my participant list, and if I screw up, just speak up that you didn't speak. Amisa.
Well, you mentioned like the prisoner one I saw last week, and that, I mean, I guess I'll just take that one, but
No, that's fine. That's fine. It's because I took up too much time, but since we spoke
Cool.
about it, that's
that's
great.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And if you come up with something else, I'm happy to talk about it, because I think we'll have some extra time today. Amy.
I saw one that is proposed, the Senate proposed a bill that seeks to keep guns out of the hands of children in Atlanta, Georgia. And it's basically like they're gonna penalize family members if they don't secure or lock a firearm around someone younger than 17, with like a few exclusions, like if they're attending like a hunter education course or stuff like that.
Yeah, so I saw that as well. I mean, we keep talking about common sense gun control. I can't think of a more common sense gun control measure than securing weapons when there's kids in the house. I mean, it's just crazy. I think you should secure weapons regardless of whether they're kids in the house, but it is nuts. So yeah, I agree with you. Interesting article. And when are people going to have common sense gun control out there? Jenny.
I saw that the COVID antiviral is cutting hospitalizations in half, but the FDA won't let us have access to it, which I thought was interesting. It was from this morning's news.
So it's in the process of being approved, right? That was
Yeah.
because yeah. So eventually it'll be approved. If it works, it works. That's great. But the FDA is not going to approve stuff early just because the preliminary results are auspicious. So that's I thought it was interesting, but then I read that it was in the process of being evaluated. And then there's we could have an entire class on expedited drug review, which is a very interesting topic. When things are not ready for prime time, do bad things happen? And I think you remember our discussion from last week about the drug that was an antiemetic that caused birth defects. So it's a huge issue. Next person I've got on this list is Jack.
I thought the story about the birth center being reopened by a community was kind of interesting.
In Colorado?
Yeah, you don't see it very often that like a big corp that's taking them down is, then a community is bringing it back.
Yeah, no, I thought that was an amazing. You want to fill in the class if they didn't catch this one? Did everybody catch this one, or they want a quick rundown? Yeah, I thought it was great too. It was the only community out of hospital birth center in Colorado. It was shut down, and the community just was outraged, and they said, no, we're bringing it back. So I agree with you completely. I thought it was a great example of community initiatives to change, to move things in a patient-centric way. So I couldn't agree with you more. Keisha.
I thought that the ones about the downed balloon impacting the medical supply chain between China and the US is interesting, especially because it was saying that 18 out of 21 essential antibiotics for the US are coming from China, along with other pharmaceuticals. And it's kind of interesting to see how diplomatic relations can impact something that you don't think about, like your access to antibiotics.
So the classic law of unintended consequences, and if China said 18 of your 21 main antibiotics come from us, and we're not going to send them to you anymore and we're going to send as many balloons over your country as we want, is that something we should just say, yeah? I mean, we can't. This is a law of unintended consequences. We can't have 18 of these 21 antibiotics that we need not coming into our country.
I'm not really sure what the right answer is there.
Yeah, remember, every question I ask, there is no right answer. That's what I just want to get you thinking about it. So yeah, I mean, every answer we have has unintended consequences. And you know, the issue is, are the unintended consequences, you know, worthy of either intervening or not intervening? Sometimes it's easy to decision on either way, but having, you know, foreign countries engage in surreptitious surveillance of your country illegally and flying over your country illegally is a pretty high. I mean, what do you think China would do if we started sending balloons over their country?
We'd probably get a pretty quick response, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I think so too in a totalitarian state. Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know the answers on these. I still don't understand why we didn't shoot it down immediately. I mean, did anybody buy the argument that it could land on populated areas when it was flying over, you know, Montana? I mean, we hear about satellites crashing down and we have no idea where they're going to go down. What are we always told about satellites coming down? Is there a risk to the population or not much of a risk?
That because the world is covered in so much water, they're probably going to land there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reality is, even over land, what percentage of our land is especially densely populated? And beyond what's densely populated, would we be able to strategically shoot it down when we know it's not over a populated area? Is that in our control, or we wouldn't know that?
I feel like it'd be possible to like wait to shoot it down until it's over an area without so many people.
Absolutely. I just didn't understand any of the decision making in this. It just didn't make any intuitive sense. And the other thing that made zero sense to me was, who thinks you need a Sidewinder missile to shoot down a balloon? What would you do to prevent the balloon from crashing onto a home? Would you use a Sidewinder missile, or would you do something else? It's a balloon.
Maybe like use something that would create a smaller hole. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, every one of these jets has cannons. It has, you know, regular rounds that they use in dogfighting and the like. They could have put 5 holes in the thing and it would have just gone. Yeah. So I didn't understand any of it. I talked to one of my friends who's in the military. I didn't understand any of it. Made no sense to him as well. It sounded more political than military. So anyway, I've got Kylie next on my list, but the list rotates. So at this point, you can just speak up if you haven't spoken.
I was looking at Kaiser Health News, but then it led me to something else on another like website, and it was like 5 teens had toxic shock syndrome in Wisconsin because they weren't educated enough on like how to use a tampon correctly. So now
I didn't see that one. That's fascinating. This comes up periodically.
I found it like through another like article I was
No, they all link. If you click on any of the Kaiser Health News, it gives you the main Kaiser Health News report, and then a lot of times it gives you other reports that are that generate the Kaiser Health News report.
I like looked up the other article because it wouldn't let me open Washington Post. So then like I don't know. I did research.
Yeah, I'm not subscribed to Washington Post, so I can't open any of their material either. So I sympathize. I always try to find people. Oh, I guess I can't say this. We're being recorded. Who share passwords, so that I can enjoy other material as well. But yeah, no, I hadn't seen that one. But toxic shock syndrome seems to be an ongoing theme, and it for some reason sometimes it's much more sort of acute due to maybe a particular circumstance. So that's fine. And so the next person on my list, I don't know if you've spoken, Megan.
Hi. Let's see. I found an article on Kaiser, actually a New Hampshire one, about how New Hampshire has elected officials to create a team to take a closer look at the 9 suspected overdose deaths in just this month. So they're creating a team to like look over all the overdoses in Manchester and everything to kind of figure out who's more at risk and like how they're getting everything.
So interesting topic came up at the State of the Union. What did the Republicans say when Biden spoke about fentanyl?
They did not like it.
And what did they, who did they say was to blame?
I don't know.
They said he was to blame. He said he was responsible for the 90,000 fentanyl deaths a year. And I think that's an exaggerated number, but it's still a huge number. Anybody remember the State of the Union or how that was spun to be Biden's fault? Or does anybody have any thoughts on fentanyl and how we solve the problem? And we've talked about this, the whole topic of substance use disorder and narcotics and the opioid epidemic.
I mean,
How do
I
we-
don't really know why, but like I have noticed that I'm seeing more stuff about fentanyl and stuff in the news, and even like from my hometown, I come from like a really small rural area in Vermont, and there were some kids at my mom's high school who had bought fentanyl laced like weed and they didn't know, and then came to school and ended up like going in like almost dying while in school. So it's just kind of crazy how much I've noticed it's become a lot more prevalent like in this area, because I feel like even 5 years ago we didn't really hear about it very much.
Yeah, so your anecdote is really cogent. The reality is that I, for the first time, heard about 420 laced with fentanyl that was killing kids. So kids were just smoking pot thinking they were getting high with what is a legal substance in many states. And it was laced with fentanyl and they died. I mean, just beyond tragic. So Biden was blamed for it because he's not controlling the borders and there's, unmitigated fentanyl crossing the borders, and it's all his fault. We've talked about what Oregon's doing, what Portugal's doing in terms of dealing with illicit substances and how to deal with it. How many border control people and screenings and dogs are necessary to prevent our current illicit use of drugs? How many border control people would we not need to hire, and how quickly will we solve the problem with border control and dog sniffing drugs and the like? Happy to reveal my personal bias on this. So how long has the war on drugs been going on? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years?
Hasn't it been going on longer than 30 years?
Oh yeah, no, decades. I stopped short. It's been going on for decades. And how successful has it been? That's why, Portugal and Oregon are decriminalizing all these things. Yeah. So just like terrorists, there aren't enough bullets or bombs or raids to get rid of terrorists, because the problem is people who are poor and disenfranchised. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, aggressively try to limit, training camps and places that are committed to violence and terrorism. But at the same time, for every terrorist you kill, you generate 10 more. They become martyrs, and you get 10 more terrorists who use the example of the powers, the dominating powers of the West typically, to justify why they're doing what they're doing. So I would suggest we really need to refocus our energies on topics of substance use disorder, drugs, and terrorism, even to say, what's the root cause and how do we go upstream? And that's why that parable of the upstream, I think, is very, very useful. I mean, even in Vietnam, which is 40 years ago now, oh my God, 50 years ago now, there was a whole process that the military went into, which is WHAM, W-H-A-M, win their hearts and minds, to say, we're not going to win guerrilla warfare. We need to win the hearts and minds of the locals for us to ever succeed. So we just keep reinventing the wheel in terms of, how we're going to create long-lasting solutions. I'm going to let whoever hasn't spoken speak up, because at this point my list has been juggled 12 times since I asked. Or I can call on people and you can tell me I've already spoken, but I'd just rather, if you haven't spoken, speak up.
So I saw an article that was about how they're starting to be able to detect autism in babies at just 1 month old. and they can even like tell the difference between which ones are going to end up having like symptoms of ADHD compared to like autism and different things like that.
That's
they're-
great. Somebody who's doing their paper on that. Somebody's doing their paper on. Oh, there you go. So
Yeah,
Elizabeth
I
and
read
Cindy-
that article too.
Okay, cool. So just add it to your research. Yeah, I'm sure it has references.
Yeah, it's a professor at Duke.
Oh, perfect.
He came up with an algorithm basically looking at like different like babies who have like their certain digestive issues and like stuff like that that have been
Super cool.
associated with autism so early. So they can basically determine if that child is more at risk for getting an autism diagnosis.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, see if you can do a 5-minute or 10-minute Zoom with a guy.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah, that's totally cool. I love it. Thanks, Sydney. That's terrific. Anybody else?
I feel like all the articles I keep finding are like among the same topic, like sort of COVID and the abortion rights movement right now.
Yeah, I know, no, they're way disproportionately involved with that, like discontinuing emergency services for COVID and implications of Dobbs. So yeah, no, I agree with you. But there's plenty of others too. So yeah, but nothing caught your eye.
No, not really this week.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's great. We're already burning through more time than I should have on this because you indulged me to talk about prisoners. Who hasn't spoken? On Kaiser? I don't think Jack has spoken, but I'm just looking at his ceiling. Earth to Jack, Earth to Jack. Somebody who has his cell may text him. Yeah, if you're not gonna participate, just log off. It doesn't make any sense to have to be logged on for the sake of attendance and then not participate. Anybody else? Everybody speak?
I mean, mine was the same as Sydney's, so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, and a great topic. And if you can get a hold of this guy, it's a great opportunity to, get more information on that screening thing. Okay, great. Why don't we take 5 minutes? We'll start at 1:05, so 7 minutes from now. And we'll talk about criminal negligence. So if you haven't read any of the materials, 7 minutes is just enough time to read the 2 articles I sent out. If you read the 2 articles on criminal negligence, then this is just enough time for a bio break and a drink. So I'll see you in 7 minutes. Since it was timely to talk about the Redonda Vought case, maybe somebody who's familiar with it can recount to the class what the facts were of the Redonda Vought case. I assume this topic was of reasonable interest since all of you guys are going to be delivering healthcare and could make a mistake, God forbid, but and potentially be held criminally liable for an inadvertent mistake. So does anybody want to share the facts of the Redonda Vought case? I gave you 2 articles. One was 7 pages and the other was, well, I don't know, just a few pages as well, loaded with articles. Talking about one was on pharmacists, and it doesn't make any difference because whether you're a pharmacist or physical therapist or anything else, when does it cross from civil liability to criminal liability? And the other one was on just the details. Although so that was the pharmacy one, and the other one was on nurses. So anybody want to share with us the facts of what happened to Redonda and the patient she was involved with?
Well, pretty much what happened was she was taking care of a patient, and then she calculated her medical dosage, and that's what killed the patient. That's what I got from the video that I watched that was attached to the news article.
So it was actually, she just gave the wrong drug. She was told to give Versed. Does anybody know what Versed is?
Isn't it a sedative?
It
And then
is.
she gave a paralytic instead or something.
Oh, God, yeah. So not a good choice. So the paralytics are literally paralyzed. You can't breathe, you can't move, you're just literally trapped in your body. And of course, if you can't breathe or move, you don't last too long. And instead of giving Versed, she gave what is, I think, the equivalent of pancuronium. I'm trying to remember what they.
Vecuronium or something.
Yeah,
like that?
vecuronium. Yeah, they're all just variations on a theme, and they're used by anesthesiologists who want to paralyze you, or they're used by intensivists who want to paralyze you because you're on a vent and they don't want you bucking the vent. If any of the technical jargon doesn't make any sense to you, just let me know and I'll explain what the vents and paralyzing people and bucking the vent means. But bottom line is, when people are in ICU settings and they're on breathing machines, you don't want people fighting the breathing machine. So you paralyze them, which is horrible because they're trapped in their bodies. They can't speak, they can't do anything, they can't move their finger. But at least they're not fighting the machine. The machine is breathing for them because they're paralyzed. And what happened to her, and what did she do, and what did Vanderbilt do?
Well, she like recognized that she like made a mistake pretty early on, and she told like her employer, but then they kind of like brushed it under the rug and like they didn't take blame. Well, I don't know. They didn't help her, I guess, in the sense of like reporting it.
So did she do the right thing, or did Vanderbilt do the right thing, or who seems like they did the right thing in this fact scenario?
Well, I feel like she did the right thing at first of like telling them, but then Vanderbilt didn't because they didn't report it, and that was.
So who screwed up here? I agree with you completely. She did the right thing. She said, I screwed up. I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. I'm devastated. And her testimony at trial to the family was, I wake up every day thinking about this, that I can spend my holidays and important times with my loved ones, and they can't. I mean, she was totally contrite about it and fully admitted she had made a mistake, and that it was completely unintentional. What did Vanderbilt do? Amy, you said it. Did they admit it? Did they report it? Did they do anything?
Well,
No.
they didn't do anything at first, but then when someone like reported it or found out, and then they kind of like went back on what they did, I feel like.
Yeah, you know what they did? They settled the case with the family, and still never reported it to state authorities. I mean, I think their behavior was like beyond reprehensible in this scenario. So why did they criminally prosecute Redonda Vaught? Should she go to jail? Did she make an honest mistake? Did Vanderbilt make an honest mistake? Was this just unfortunate circumstances?
I mean, I agree that it was medical malpractice in this case, and that like the civil lawsuit was, that it was reasonable. I don't think that it should have been criminal because, she was in a position where she could make this mistake. But also Vanderbilt didn't do the right thing on their part. She immediately told who she needed to tell and fessed up to her mistake, and they didn't report it to the authorities. And from one of the articles, it said that 2 of the doctors ruled it as natural death immediately after it happened. But then she wasn't actually investigated for criminal conduct for like a year later. And at first they cleared her and then they reopened it.
Yeah, the facts of this case are just beyond ridiculous. I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why I think I've said this a bunch of times in class. Facts matter. The specifics of a circumstance matter. So I think in this case, I think there's a pretty resounding, wow, this is not the way to handle medical mistakes that are inadvertent, that the person reported in a timely fashion, not Vanderbilt, but the individual involved, and was clearly contrite about it. So is there any circumstance where criminal liability should be held? Are all mistakes civil, or do some mistakes rise to the level of raising the possibility of criminal
Well, wasn't there a case, I can't remember what state it was, but this nurse was killing people with the IV bags. He was putting a medication in there. I think it was like, I don't remember what it was, but he like ended up
No,
getting,
you're absolutely right. And it's not one case. There are many cases where
yeah, but
the
he
quote
didn't
unquote
get
angels
caught.
of death,
He got caught like way after.
right?
He didn't have a reasoning, which was the scary part. He just did it for like, why not? It was like innocent people
Yeah,
dying.
grins and giggles. Yeah. So what's the difference between those two? What's the difference between that person and criminal law and redondavat and civil liability?
Well, with her case, she openly knew that she made a mistake. And sorry, Sid, for like just chiming in, but like she openly knew that she made that mistake. And now she's living with that regret for the rest of her life. Where there's other nurses out there who are like kind of, I don't want to say like doing this on purpose, but they kind of are, like the case that Kylie brought up. Like they like were literally killing innocent people for no reason. And if you're going to be a nurse to want to, like, I guess I don't want to say like kill people, but then you shouldn't be a nurse. But also mistakes, I feel like happen. I shouldn't say happen all the time.
Yeah,
But
they
when you
happen
know,
all the time. That's a very fair statement. They happen all the time.
but if you're open to like making that mistake and you report it to the right people, then like I don't think you should be criminally charged for it. But
Right.
if it's the case that they're doing it on purpose, then they should be charged.
You
That's
mentioned
just my personal opinion, though.
No, it's not your personal opinion. It's actually the basis of criminal and civil liability because you use the terms on purpose twice. So your intuition and gut response is spot on. So what is the difference between on purpose, criminal, and civil liability, inadvertent, unintended?
I think it comes down to like the intent, like if you were
Intent.
trying
Yeah,
to-
thanks, Sydney. Spot on. So I was just looking for somebody to use the word intent. So criminal prosecutions are based on intent. Did you intend to hurt the person? Did you intend to kill them? Did you intend? I mean, so, and then there's an entire gray zone. And what does anybody know what the burden of proof is? So when it's civil liability, is it beyond a reasonable doubt or more likely than not? What's beyond a reasonable doubt for a jury instruction? When you hear this all the time on TV and in the media, this has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And what's more stringent, beyond a reasonable doubt or more likely than not? There's no reason for you to know the answer to any of this, but I thought somebody might know. What's more stringent, proving something beyond a reasonable doubt or proving something that is more likely than not?
I mean, I believe that like if you're able to find something that's more likely to happen than not, and it's something that's preventable, then you don't need to necessarily prove beyond reasonable doubt. Like reasonable doubt can account for anything.
Yeah, Kelsey, your instincts are totally correct on this. So beyond a reasonable doubt is a really heavy burden of proof. You're looking at any reason to say that a reasonable person might doubt this and you're free. And that's criminal. That's the criminal standard. You have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And all the defense attorneys have to do is create reasonable doubt. That's not the case in civil liability. In civil liability, you typically have, as I mentioned on a previous malpractice lecture, you just have to have a battle of the experts, and the jury just needs to come to a conclusion that it's more likely than not that this was a mistake. And so if it's more likely that it was a mistake and an error, then you're negligent and you incur civil liability, which is, but what's the liability? What's the net result of a criminal conviction?
Jail time.
Yeah, incarceration. I mean, it's a huge difference. It's gigantic. So the burden of proof, and I think it varies by jurisdiction. But I don't on criminal negligence. I think it varies by jurisdiction how far. And there's three standards. There's more likely than not. That's the lowest threshold for proving somebody guilty. There's trying to remember what the indeterminate one is. I'm blanking on it right now, but there's an indeterminate one, and then there's beyond a reasonable doubt. So there's three standards of proof to juries, And I apologize for not remembering it. And maybe it'll come to me or somebody can Google it. And it's would be burden of proof, civil, criminal, and other. But anyway, the bottom line is, so can anybody tell me scenarios where you think you should you know, where a penalty or a standard of care that's more rigorous could come into play for, you know, people who make mistakes. So we have intent, the people who tried, nurses who tried to kill patients or intended to kill patients. That's great. That's a slam dunk. That's criminal. Then we have people who apologize. They said it was an error, it was an oversight. That's clearly, again, on the civil side, where it should only be monetary, not jail time. Can anybody think of any scenarios where you might want to have something in between? I'm happy to share some with you.
I mean, my first thought is like, how are these people going about reporting it? Like, human error is bound to happen no matter what you do, like nobody's perfect. But if they like wait a while to report it or try and like cover it up or something because they're worried about the consequences of the mistake, then I would say that that might fall in the gray area. But like, if I made a mistake, I caught the mistake, I reported it, I followed through, like I went through the right steps to correct it, I feel like that's a different story. But yeah, I guess it just kind of depends on the following acts after the mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I agree with you. It's so fact specific. And frankly, if you're covering something up, I mean, that's fraud. You're clearly you have the intent to deceive. So that again crosses the threshold. So if you put up a sign that says skate on this pond, it's a great place to skate, but you absolutely know that the ice isn't safe. Is that negligence? Is that criminal? Or is that somewhere in between?
I think that's criminal because you had the intent to convince people that it was a safe thing to do despite knowing that it wasn't.
Yeah, and again, it really comes into a question of the state of mind of the person who was doing it. They might say, hey, look, I was encouraging skating. I wasn't encouraging unsafe skating. I was encouraging a recreational activity. How do I know how thick the ice is? So, I mean, there's an entire spectrum of activities and that are sort of beyond the pale. And there's an entire body of law on what is called wanton and reckless disregard for human safety, and behavior that's so outrageous that people say we should impose criminal liability. And I agree with you, but it's so fact specific. It is this so hard to say these are the rules and this is how it should be applied. Now, I'll give you a perfect example. So what happened at the Texas elementary school with, dozens of law enforcement people standing there looking at each other while kids were texting, please come in, please save us, please help us. And, anyway, 20 people got killed, 20 young children. Is that just run-of-the-mill negligence? Is that criminal negligence? Is that just criminal behavior? I mean, clearly, we will all agree, especially in retrospect, that it was beyond stupid and violated every protocol of intervention known to man for active shooters.
Is this the one where like authorities waited too long to actually go into?
Yeah, what was the name of the town in Texas? I'll look it up. Everybody's been fired since. Uvalde, sorry about that, folks. I should have remembered that. So Uvalde. So is that just pay the families millions of dollars and we're good, or should somebody go to jail for that? At least the supervisor.
I mean, are there like specific timeline guidelines for like how you're supposed to act in a situation?
Yeah,
like
so
that?
there's just no question. Everybody said uniformly, when you have an active shooter, there's only one thing you do is as law enforcement. What is that?
Like just stop him.
Yeah, you just confront the person and shoot them. I understand that you're putting your life at risk, but you shoot the person. You go in there with your body armor, and as quickly as you can get into that room and neutralize the active shooter, that's what you do. Otherwise, people die. And that is established protocol for all police interventions. I only bring this up, not because I want to talk about police interventions or that, but just that there are so many fact scenarios. There's a Texas, I think he was a neurosurgeon, who was repeatedly paralyzing and biopsying normal structures and saying they were tumors. He was grossly incompetent, and he literally killed and maimed and paralyzed so many people. He's now in jail. Is that the kind of behavior that warrants criminal intervention? Even though there may not be specific intent, but the degree of the negligence and completely wanton and reckless disregard for human safety is just beyond profound. Should those people go to jail? So if you're grossly incompetent, does it reach that? Is there any fact scenario that reaches the level of being incarcerated?
Can you repeat that, please?
Is there any, so I use the word wanton and willful disregard for human safety. So are there case scenarios where you're so grossly incompetent that you fulfill the requirements of being wantonly and willfully disregarding human safety? Meaning, a doctor like that isn't like waking up one morning and having a bad case and going, wow, maybe I need to get some additional training or supervision in my operating room. This is a doctor who's literally killed, paralyzed, and maimed dozens of patients. It raises a bunch of interesting issues. One, the personal culpability of the person who's doing it, but also, what else? He's working in an operating room. He's working in a hospital.
I mean, people are trusting you to, like, they're signing consent forms to get the procedure that they asked for done. And like, they're expecting you to like do your duty as like somebody, I guess I'm kind of blanking on the words, but like, they're like expecting you to do your duty to like keep people safe. Like that's the general like idea of what somebody going into that situation is thinking. So if they're not, like, if they're going against their duty basically, or providing misinformation, then I would say yes. So folks, if this interests you in the least, the guy's name is Christopher Dunch, Duntchsch. He was sentenced to life in prison. His nickname was Dr. Death. First degree felony of harming an elderly woman in his operating room. It wasn't one case, it was dozens. And he's currently under a life sentence for his behavior. I guess the issue to me is, what is the OR staff doing during this entire procedure? They're watching this, literally, he's a butcher, hurting and killing these people. And clearly on a very ethical basis, if you know you have a complication rate that's 10 or 100 times the rate of any normal person, why would you continue to practice medicine? Wouldn't you say, I need to be retrained, or I need to limit my practice, or I need to have an office practice? I mean, there's some exceptionally egregious examples of behavior that warrant careful scrutiny. And he was one of them, but he's not the first one. But he was sentenced to life in prison for what they described as intentionally injuring an elderly patient. And if you just, like I said, Google his name, Christopher Dunch, Duntschch. The stories, it'll make your skin crawl.
It says only three of his surgeries were performed with no complications. That's kind of crazy.
Can you imagine doing hundreds and hundreds of surgeries and only 3 did not have complications?
Crazy.
So what's even more crazy is, what the heck was the hospital doing doing during all this time? What, other than collecting lots of operating room fees, lots of anesthesia fees, lots of hospitalizations, which they make tons of money. That's why the system's pretty corrupt to the core. But I mean, I think, you know, the hospital executives who knew of this information and did not immediately take him off, you know, off his admitting privileges were equally to blame for it. You know, he might have just been completely clueless and unethical and immoral, but they were just clearly lining their pockets, knowing that this man had provided no benefit to his patients, and forget no benefit. He was actively harming the patients in everything he did. That's kind of where that's kind of where it's at. It's very fact specific. You know what? I'm going to look this up because I'm killing myself because I can't remember standards of proof.
Does the like surgical board or like a hospital or anything, like, is there like I assume they all look at like patient outcomes, and but like at what point do they say like, okay, this person obviously not getting the outcomes that we needed, like we need to either let them make them stop practicing or provide more education for them, or
Yeah,
like,
so basically the hospital has a legal obligation to make sure people are practicing within the standard of care. I've worked at 2 hospitals where there were neurosurgeons who had greater than 10 wrong level surgeries or huge complication rates, and nothing was done about it. One was the chief of neurosurgery who had multiple, and one was the sole neurosurgeon in a small community hospital with literally over 10 wrong level surgeries. None of them were ever reported to the Board of Registration in Medicine, and nor did their colleagues or the operating room personnel do it.
is that not illegal?
Yeah, it's totally illegal in Massachusetts, and both these places were in Massachusetts. There's a snitch law. You're required to report people who are a danger to patients. So, so the third category. So it's beyond a reasonable doubt. I just looked it up. A preponderance of the evidence, which is somewhere between beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond more likely than not. Then there's preponderance of the evidence, which is intermediate, and then beyond a reasonable doubt is the criminal standard. But these people clearly should have been told, you know what, you want to be a neurosurgeon and you can't operate it, just start a neurology medical practice. You know, you're not allowed to go to the OR. Or if you go to the OR, you need to be supervised. So yeah, it's pretty unfortunate. But that's the reality of it. I don't want to, I kind of dragged this on a little bit too long in terms of, you know, my topics and stuff. Do you guys have any questions or issues? Is there anything that you're interested in that you want to explore more? Because again, you know, I think it's nice to have more of a didactic lecture, or if not didactic, sort of just a topic that we focus on that's of interest. Did people find this of interest today in terms of the criminal versus civil? Yeah. Okay, great. And I understand that half you guys took this course because it's required, so you don't have to nod. You can just say, I'm taking this course because it's required. It's not, it's you guys are innocent of the requirement of the course. So it's all good. Joe, so yeah, this is great. Any questions or topics, you can just email me. If people want to, you know, spend 5 minutes talking about their paper and getting some help in it. I've sent a bunch of people stuff regarding, you know, maybe articles that I thought, there was an article, I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was like postpartum psychosis, no, but it was one of your topics, and it was in Kaiser Health News. Yeah, keep an eye on it, because you'll find a lot of current stuff that may be completely germane to your papers. So that's it for me. Anything else on your end? Great. Have a great weekend. Be safe. We get some warmth for the next couple of days, 50s and 60s. Spring is only 40 days away. Enjoy the Super Bowl if you're going to a Super Bowl party, or if you're a fan of football. And again, I'm here to help. Anything that you need, just either text me or shoot me an email. All good?
Thank you.
Be well, be safe.
Thank you.